already arrayed behind me here, and the topic of this will be creative and digital crossover. So got a couple of speakers here that you've already heard from already, and a couple of new people who will hopefully introduce themselves, but we're hoping to have a lot more time for audience questions in this session. So if you have got any questions for anyone on this panel, we can get our roving mic to you and hopefully answer those questions. Are we ready with the roving mic as well for this session? Brilliant. Okay, so in this session we have 4 speakers. Should I just go, I'm going to kind of go left to right, but then finish with the person who's going to be leading the session. So we have Andrew Robinson from the Foundation for Digital Creativity. We have Dave Thomas, who you've already met, from Siemens. We have Maker and Technical Coordinator at the Landing, James Med. And our leader for this panel will be, again, digital artist Gemma May Latham.
Hi, everyone. This is on, isn't it? Yeah, you've already heard me and Dave talk about ourselves a little bit and have a little discussion. So just to begin with, I wanted to ask Andrew and James to introduce themselves and give a little background, and then we're going to have a bit of a discussion and open it up and hopefully a bit more of a conversation with the audience during this session. So, Andrew.
Hi, I'm Andrew Robinson, and I'm not used to doing Westlife tributes acts on these stools, which anything could happen. So I've worked at the University of Manchester and then got into public engagement, trying to get youngsters interested in technology and creative things. I've also worked as a lighting designer. I think that was my first interest in pretty things which flash and flashing lights. I've also got the artistic connection as well. So that led on to, I created a code bug, which became the prototype for the BBC Microbit, which they went off and designed. So I've done sort of some digital things. And now I co-founded the Foundation for Digital Creativity, which is trying to run various events and various opportunities to get more people just engaged in stuff, really. So it doesn't have to be anything particular thing, but it's just generally more engaged. So I'll pass back.
Hi, my name's James Med. I manage it's an Eagle Lab over at the Landing in Media City, UK in Salford. So we're a space equipped for rapid prototyping and product prototyping for small businesses across the Northwest, as well as a space for young people and older people to come and learn new skills. As we're talking about skills and stuff today, I'll just point out that everything I know about making and coding and the rest of it is completely self-taught. So my career started out in music technology and recording studios and gradually meandered into art and design. And both of those things, I never set out to learn Python. I never set out to learn how to 3D print things. I set out how to make the stuff I wanted to make and happened to find tools that let me do those things. Until a couple of years, until the year before last, I was running something called the Awkward Arcade, which was an experimental video game arcade, on the back of which I was running workshops teaching kids how to make their own games. And right now I'm doing a similar thing where I'm getting a lot of young people and adults making computer games and making modular games devices and things like that. Where the process isn't the most important thing, it's the creativity and the context which is most important. So I will talk more about that, I'm sure, as we go along.
I think there's a lot to dig into there. And I think this kind of whole arts, technology, digital skills, creative skills is a really interesting space in terms of crossovers. And I think, Dave, I was interested in throwing that back to you, sort of in response to your talk earlier, which was really interesting in terms of using digital technology and a kind of a creative approach to automation. How vital do you feel creative skills are in your actual workforce themselves?
Yeah, it's interesting with creative skills because one of our values at Siemens is innovation, and we recognise that innovation is going to be key in terms of keeping a manufacturing plant open in the UK, let alone in Congleton. When you actually ask people what innovation means, very rarely do they actually mention the word creativity. Creativity or creative people are the ones that, like we might send posters to and, can you do a bit of corporate comms for us? But they're not, they're not typically the engineers. And we've highlighted that there's a massive gap within our organisation for people who are able to look at problems and think creatively because we're just not programmed to do so. We're so embedded in thinking like logically. I can't remember the speaker before mentioned we always look back at history, and we just try and basically do the same and again, but just slightly better. Whereas creative thought processes and creative problem solving, we think is going to give us that next step change in making those productivity improvements. So it's hugely important for us. Because if we don't have those creative skills, we can't innovate by definition. And innovation's key to keeping us there.
It's really good. I think the term innovation, as you said, it's really difficult to pin down and almost overused to the point that we don't even know what it means anymore. We just say, oh, it's innovative. And I think government have kind of hooked onto it in terms of a growth kind of thing. And we've almost lost the sort of experimentation side of innovation. James, I'm very familiar with some of the projects that you do over at Eagle Labs, and there's some really innovative things over there. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of the sort of medical applications and things like that you've been doing.
I'll just go back to your point as well, that when I talk about innovation with people who come through our space, I principally talk about things that don't exist yet, or if we're doing a workshop, thinking about things that exist and how you can approach them differently. I have a really big problem with people doing cookie cutter workshops where they come in and just follow a bunch of steps, and by the end of it, they haven't really had any agency over what they've made. They've just made it. And this is the whole, look, I 3D printed this thing, rather than I came up with an idea and here it is, and it happens to be 3D printed. So one of the things we've been working on with the NHS is devices, well, all kinds of things. One of the things we've worked on is a device that allows people to remotely monitor their vital signs and send them back to the hospital. And it's been really interesting and fun working with clinicians, because they don't have a product design background, but they have a list of criteria. So once you actually sit down with them, they start designing products without realizing that they're doing it. They're just saying, well, these are all the things it needs to do. Okay, we'll do that and it will do a thing, we'll do that and it will do a thing. By the end of it, they've made something that fulfills their purpose, and they haven't had to say, we're innovating, we haven't had to say, we're being creative. We've literally just done all the things that need doing, and lo and behold, the product exists at the end, which is really good fun.
I think that's thinking then about, so you're talking about getting to an end goal that might have set things that you need to achieve versus the sort of innovation of reaching a goal that you haven't set. So you've said you learning through just doing, because there's somewhere you want to get and you want to learn it, but you're not trying to achieve certain learning goals along the way.
Yeah, and they don't come in saying, we need to 3D print this solution. They come in saying, we need a thing that does X, Y, and Z. How do we incorporate all those things? And I say, well, first of all, you might not need to use... The worst question I hear when people come into our space is, well, what could I 3D print? And when anyone says that, I just say, well, it's likely you don't need a 3D printer. You need to go back a few steps.
Dave, would you say that applies to the sort of approach in industry?
Yeah, certainly. There's a real danger of that. Maybe not with necessarily the 3D printing for us, but with robotics. It's like robotics, like collaborative robotics is the catch-all for everything now. You know, if we want to automate, so we've got to use a robot, and that's not necessarily, you know, the right key. But I think you're completely right, because it's more around a learning experience. It's not like going out and say, learn robotics or learn 3D printing. These things are just tools that help you get to that end goal. So it is important that we actually encourage that learning, and what I love about creativity is that kind of, and why I think we're not so fluent in it, I suppose, is that it requires you to be quite vulnerable, I guess, and put yourself out there and admit you don't know, and put like what you're thinking on paper, or ideas for criticism, and people don't like that. It's not easy to do. So yeah, I definitely agree that we're in danger of that if we don't take a sensible approach.
Andrew, do you have any thoughts on that?
Possibly. Me and Gemma have chatted about things before, and I've talked about the chasm that exists in art and engineering. So a quick question here. Who would identify maybe as an artist, would they say predominantly here? So that's that. Who would predominantly identify as a sort of engineer inside of things, or? Right. So that's interesting. Probably more people identifying on the art. So I talked about the chasm with the art and engineering, and I actually, some people immediately jumped to the decision that, well, it's a binary thing. It must be either art, engineering, big chasm in the middle. My argument, it's not. The chasm is the chasm of can'ts. That engineering and art is both on the same side. They're more or less the same thing. Where the chasm is the people which say, I can't. And that, I'd say, engineering and art encompass music, they encompass dancing, they can encompass programming, all sorts of things, and you find lots of people go, I can't sing, I can't dance, oh no, I'm not going to do that. And so also, I mean, I did something where looking at knitting patterns, and that was knit a roll, purl a roll, and you can argue whether purl is an engineering skill or whether that's a knitting skill. That's got limited appeal, that joke, if you need to know that Perl is an engineering language. But so you also need to know that Perl is a stitch in knitting. So anyway, but what I actually found was a lot of people, they were frightened. They say, oh yeah, I'm creative, I do knitting. But they're interested in following a pattern. But then when you say, right, design a jumper, then suddenly that's a scary prospect because they haven't got the pattern to follow. Well, following a knitting pattern is basically just following a computer program where you say, do this for so long and then do that. So I'd argue that a lot of the creativity aspect is not being frightened to fail, not being frightened to have a go and say, I don't actually know how to do that, I'll learn, which is exactly what James was saying. It's not getting skills to, here's the tick box of things that I need. It's this is what I want to make because I want to build an automatic teas made or something. So therefore, I'll learn the skills which are involved in fluid dynamics and cups of tea and all sorts. So I think my thought was very much what you were saying, that it's the people don't like the creative aspect. It's putting themselves out and saying, this is new, nobody else has come up with that. And that's the same as it's a frightened of failing. So I think that's what we need to work on to get people just empowered to do whatever they want to do, really.
Yeah, I think fear of failure is a huge issue. And as artists, it's something we're taught. Failure is a good thing. You can see opportunities in failure, which I think other skill sets is not. So maths is a right and wrong answer, usually. And I think also in terms of SMEs and sort of businesses that are growing, failure is totally dismissed.
I kind of want to design a workshop that failure is the output. It's really difficult to pitch a workshop to someone who's going to give you money to say there might not be a deliverable, but people will learn how to fail, I think.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's nice to hear that being resonated. You don't often hear that in an engineering environment, and it's something we put within Siemens. We have what's called like an ownership culture. We want people to be able to take ownership. Part of that is being sort of taking initiative and executing things. And we had a really nice example of someone saying we should support fail because first attempt is learning, and it just resonates so well with people because we don't mind people making mistakes. We want to try and avoid people making the same mistake twice. But it's through making that mistake, it's more important to talk about what you've learned and what that journey you're on as to the actual mistake you've made.
And perhaps in pinning down what innovation is, I think innovation happens in those moments of failure when you see a different route or something else arises out of it.